Hi, I'm Caroline and I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea, and I'm also a trustee of Colchester Food Bank, which is where I am right now. And as you can see, I'm not at the moment self-isolating. In fact, it's one of my volunteering days.
And I'm Andy Griffiths, and I train people for the Diocese of Chelmsford. I'm working from home. And Caroline, give us a bit of a guided tour. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Okay, so what you're seeing at the moment is some of the rows of crates. So this is where we keep the donated food. So I'll give you a bit of a walk through the warehouse. So
crates and crates and crates. There's like 6 or 7 aisles full.
There's quite a lot going on. So food comes in through the back here. We are in an industrial area, and food comes in through the back as donations. And everything that comes in to us gets weighed in. So its first stop is our giant weighing machine behind me.
Wow.
And
okay.
That's weighed in, and its weight gets recorded in the book along with where it came from. And then before it goes out to any clients, it gets weighed out again so that we're completely accountable for everything that we're given.
I see.
So the only thing that's wasted is things that are beyond their best before date before they get to us, or anything that's damaged or spoilt. Apart from that, everything goes straight through the process. So the next thing that happens is that volunteers sort things. So there's a whole row of crates here at the moment that's ready for the day's donations to be sorted into. And they get sorted into type. So you've got things like fruit and meat and fish and biscuits and so forth, and toiletries down below. And then once they're sorted into type, they're then put in date order, and they go on the shelves in date order. So all of these shelves that are now behind me. So we've got, this aisle is rice. So you've got rice with different dates on it. And obviously the thing with the shortest date goes out first. So then we have an end aisle, which for social distancing I can just about approach at the moment. So I'm going to come down to the end of this, but I can't go all the way down. So this is our picking aisle, and this is where we take the stuff that is the shortest date and we turn it into food parcels. Here are 2 of our lovely volunteers, Adrian
Excellent.
and Judy, doing some picking for food parcels. And we have to keep our 2 meters away. They don't have to be 2 meters away from each other because they're husband and wife,
right.
Which makes them a dream team in a small warehouse. And then we make up food parcels, and they get weighed. And then when they're given to a client who comes in with a voucher, they exchange the voucher that they've been given by an agency for one of these parcels of food. So you'd get 1 crate if there's just 1 or 2 of you in the family, or you get a family parcel if there's more, and that'll be 2 of these crates worth, plus whatever toiletries you need.
Wow.
So there's quite a lot that goes on in this warehouse. And out the front, normally we'd have a lovely cafe area where people would meet and greet. We'd do cake and tea and coffee and sit down with people. We'd talk to them about the various agencies that can help them. We have a menu on the tables, which is a menu of support of different organisations. We partner with over 200 organisations, and we would make sure that they get the help they need to not keep needing a food parcel. But at the moment, all of that is having to be done through a hatch. So if I take us through, I'll take us through this door. And as you can see, this area out here has got a lot of other crates of stuff. And we have, by the front door, a barrier. So this area is where we would actually see our clients. So there's a line on the floor. I don't know if I can enable you to see that, where they stand. And then our volunteer stands behind here, sadly, usually without PPE. We have a handful of masks that we can offer, but generally the volunteers decline them and just keep themselves safe, because we don't have enough PPE to go round at the moment, although we're working on that. And we are still open from Monday till Saturday from 10 till 2. So that's the stuff we're doing. And here behind me, beavering away, is Michael. Say hello.
Hello.
And
Hello,
Michael is
Michael.
our CEO who holds all the threads together, gets all our funding and our grants, pulls all the team together, coordinates everything, and is almost constantly on the phone.
I understand. Thank you for the tour, Caroline. Now, you have had one hell of a week, haven't you?
It's certainly been interesting. Yes, it has certainly been interesting doing Holy Week remotely. There were a number of things that we needed to do. So the first thing was to make sure that we were including people who were not able to engage online. So one of the things that I was actually able to do was to get a local newspaper to print an entire page spread of an Easter feature with prayers to say for each day, with a sort of article reflection on what Easter means in a pandemic and the hope that we have. And he gave me a whole page in the newspaper, and that went across a really wide area through every door. So that was the way we reached everybody, including numbers to call for help and various things, so that there wasn't a household we didn't reach. So that was awesome. And then we did some hand deliveries, isolating the service sheets for 72 hours and handling them with gloves and disinfectant and all sorts of things, and poking them through doors with a ruler, so that we were able to deliver service sheets to people, so that at 11 o'clock on Easter Day, we were all saying the same service together, some through email and some through the bit of paper through their door, and some people actually Zoomed in and we had a Zoom service.
Yeah. And you've had some tough things to do over the phone, haven't you?
Yeah, well, on Easter Sunday, we went from a Zoom service, which was really uplifting, to me needing to do last rites for one of my people on the phone because I couldn't visit. And so a nurse, in a great act of courage, actually spent time stood alongside him, holding the phone to his ear so that I could do last rites with him.
Wow. This is episode 3, and in our first couple of conversations, Caroline and I started to suggest that Christian leadership is community organizing. We started thinking about what community organizing is. We said it was a tradition, and we said it was a set of tools. We made a few suggestions about what that means in a pandemic. I'm glad to say some people have started writing to us and telling us their experiences at a distance. If you want to do that, I'm at randomlyandy@live.com.
And I'm at revcarolinebeckett@gmail.com. We had a message saying, this pandemic has already exposed one idol, the idol of church buildings. When people say they can't worship God without a church building, they prove that this idol has a place in their heart. What other idols are being exposed? Andy, you can take that one.
Thank you very much. I tell you what, if you want to build rapport with somebody, the best possible way to do it is to tell them that they're an idolater. No, maybe not. I think a much more helpful way to frame this, if I may say so, anonymous messenger, is to think in terms of exile. And Caroline and I were trying to develop this in the last episode. Think of the loss of the temple in the Old Testament. And God's people don't go straight to being given Isaiah 40 and being cheered up. They have a time to lament. And probably people who are missing their church buildings, they need a bit of lamenting time before you motor on in there and start telling them it's idolatry. They need to adjust to a new way of being church. That, having said that, I mean, you kind of have got a point that the human heart is a manufacturer of idols. What the heart decides for, the will, follows that decision, and then the mind justifies afterwards. So I have thought for a bit about idols being exposed in my life. So here's the two that I can think of. Number one, being liked. Oh dear, I do like being liked. So moving my life onto social media is a really dangerous place for me. Social media is really a machine for seeing that people like me like me. And there's a really tangible way of seeing if I'm liked or not. And it doesn't really matter whether I'm liked or not. It only matters whether I'm faithful to God. But the idol is strong in my life. But one thing that helped is I'm admin on a local Facebook group, and we had a user back, I guess about 10 days ago, that we had to turn down some posts, and she started getting angry and started throwing out accusations in some detail. And I felt like that was my opportunity to stop and say, look, if I was doing it in order to be liked, then it's time to stop. If it's of some use, then it really doesn't matter whether she appreciates me or not. That helped. Second idol I've noticed in myself is busyness. I do like to stay busy. So when this whole thing began, I launched myself into activism of all kinds. And then, well, actually Boris Johnson was right when he said that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if it's a marathon, we will expect to hit the wall at various points. I hit one sort of Friday of last week, and I found I wasn't sort of waking up on time and finding it hard to get out of bed. And I realized the activism had to stop and move to something more sustainable. Thank you for that message. We also had Ben Hudd, who got in touch with us from Cornwall. And Ben says lots of nice things about us.
Oh, thank you very much, Ben.
And then he says, if we're to shape culture in our communities, we need first of all to accept the call to serve the whole community in our shared space and demonstrate servant leadership. Establishing Christian culture through the opportunities that wider community leadership brings without labeling it as such, we're finding is a really powerful tool in shaping the opportunity for conversations about faith as and when they arrive. There's something deeply spiritual in bringing kingdom values to the table without pushing an agenda, probably simply the aroma of Christ permeating our shared experiences. Just this week, we've been able to establish a satellite food bank, organize a delivery service for the local shop and GP surgery, been able to place the church in the center of serving the village during this outbreak, all without carbs through doors. Today, I had the privilege of having a very significant conversation with one of the parish council, who's been particularly belligerent about the church over the years, and he's definitely a person of peace. Had we not asked the parish council to partner with us in developing the food bank, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have that conversation. And now the favor we have with him is infectious in his generous posts in the village Facebook page. Also loved what you said about leadership on social media. We had a bit of a Mexican standoff between the two village shops on the village Facebook page this week about their methods of ensuring social distancing. All we needed to do was publicly demonstrate our support, love, and gratitude for both of them, and very politely challenge the swearing that was taking place. And then 135 likes later from members of the village, both are working beautifully together with those that were being unkind apologizing. We found, I think, that simply coming in the opposite spirit of love is leadership enough, and very attractive to all those that want to agree, but didn't find they had the voice to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I recognise a lot of what he's saying there in what's going on across the board, actually. And what you were saying earlier about idols, because communities have ways of doing things. They have particular people who are the go-to people for things, who have a particular reputation. And what this has done is actually a community organizing principle in and of itself. So one of the community organizing principles is that you disorganize and reorganize for each new action. Now, in society at large, people are not used to doing that. So one of the idols that we've been struggling with is the way things have always been done and the people who've always done it, which I suppose is kind of two idols really, rather than just the one. But what's interesting is that new leaders are emerging in the current crisis, and some of the existing leaders, partly because perhaps they haven't got the expertise and the technology, or partly just because they've got other concerns or other family issues or what have you, have been stepping back, and new leaders have been stepping forward with all of the rawness and the inexperience, but also the enthusiasm and the connections, and things are going in new directions. And some people are loving this, and some people are really, really struggling with the fact that the old channels aren't working, that you can't just keep doing what you were doing before, but louder. And you know, in Food Bank, we've had to completely restructure how we do things. And we've got a member of staff on furlough, and we've got 2 new part-time members of staff coming on board because of grant funding and that's really deeply unsettling. And we have one absolutely incredible volunteer who's held everything together for a long time, front of house, where we meet and greet our clients, who's actually needed to take the very difficult step of self-isolating, and because she is at risk. And that's quite tough, because then that's going to look very different for the other volunteers. So that's an idol, I think, that we have to recognise and acknowledge. And part of the mourning process, perhaps, is mourning the loss of the way things have always happened in the past, but not allowing that to completely get in the way of celebrating the new stuff, and not sniping from the sidelines if it's new stuff that we didn't start or didn't think of.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've written a poem.
Oh, I've written lots of poems, yeah. So I've written one about, because actually what's going on, the Holy Week that we've just had, people are saying, oh, this is this unnatural Holy Week, you know, we've never known a Holy Week like it, it's unprecedented, it's terrible, what do we do, we're all disorientated. And actually, in a way, this Holy Week that we've lived is something that fits very naturally into the long story of the people of God, because the people of God, the Bible is a balance of sort of homeland and temple and tabernacle, and wandering and exile and hardship, and you can see that dynamic rise and fall throughout the whole of Scripture. And you can see in the story of Holy Week itself that actually what we have just lived through is in many ways more similar to the original Holy Week than most of the things we do most of the time. So for example, you know, the hidden meal in the upper room, the fact that they've gone away to be alone in the garden, they're avoiding being out and being seen, and then Jesus is taken and he dies alone. You know, he's way up there on the cross, and even John and Mary, who are actually standing there, can't ease his pain, can't actually get to him properly. And the rest of his disciples are nowhere to be seen. They've shut themselves up in a room. And the first, you know, moment of Jesus greeting them is him actually having to come through a locked door and say, peace be with you. So I did a kind of a reflection on that. That goes a bit like this. When Jesus wept in darkness on the night before he died, it was alone. Nobody stood as comfort by his side. Instead, he bowed his lonely head. Not my will, but your will, he said. Our fears and tears he understands. We can't be near, but Jesus can. When Jesus suffered heat and pain, gasping for every breath, neither his mother nor his friend could ease him in his death. Instead, he gave them to each other. Make him your son, make her your mother. Our loved one's pain he understands. We can't be near, but Jesus can. When Jesus died, a stranger came to do his best in haste. The wrappings plain, a borrowed tomb, no flowers or spices placed. The Son of God gone from their care, his mourners barred from going there. Our thwarted plans he understands. We can't be near, but Jesus can. On Easter morn the sun arose, holy and whole and free, and his first words were for the one who wept and could not see. He spoke her name. She raised her head and saw him risen from the dead. Now at the gate of death he stands, and all we love are in his hands. And that was written with some folks in mind. I have 3 funerals to take next week, and they're all funerals where family hasn't been able to be there. They haven't been able to be there at the last moments to say those last things, to do those last things, and they will not all be able to be there at the funeral. So it was about trying to find, in the midst of all this, in Jesus's hasty burial, in everything being in disarray around his ending, actually what that looks like for us and what that looked like for those first disciples is very similar. And alongside that, actually, a reading that's been profound is the anointing of Jesus by Mary, and he defends her in that. So she's doing this anointing with this incredibly expensive ointment, and Judas is saying, oh, that should have been given to the poor, it should have been sold, you should have done this, you know the procedure, this is what we do. And Jesus is saying, no, you don't get it. You'll always have the poor, you can help them anytime, you can do those things every day, and you should be doing those things every day. But this is about something different. It's about her doing what she can now for her loved one, because later she won't be able to. Later that care won't be possible. And I think what I'm challenging folks to do is to actually do now those things that they will later wish they had done. Yeah. And plan well. Do things like write a will. If you haven't done one, do things like say those things, make those reconciliations with people, because we don't know, none of us know how this is going to play out, and that's actually a powerful dynamic this Holy Week.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Caroline. So last time we suggested that community organising is a tradition and a set of tools. It's also a rule, and here is where we come to the iron rule. It's really important, I think. It's up on the wall of my office as a daily reminder. Of course, I'm not in my office at the moment, but still, if I was there, it would be there. And the iron rule, it goes like this: never do for others what they could do for themselves. It's a bit like the golden rule, which is do to others what you would have them do to you.
So let's hear that again.
Never do for others what they could do for themselves.
And I love that. I mean, that is brilliant. It's one of our core operating principles at Food Bank. We always get people to participate in their own recovery from whatever crisis they've been through. And we deliberately, volunteers are often really surprised that we don't make things easy, that we don't bend over backwards, that we don't run round after people, that we don't phone agencies for them, and we don't deliver things, and we don't do this and we don't do that. And we say, actually, no, it needs to be a two-way participation. People need to feel that they're doing things for themselves. And equally in ministry, I mean, we had Easter Sunday on Zoom and Palm Sunday on Zoom. We actually had members of the congregation line by line take it in turns to read the gospel. Now, if we'd been in church, none of them would have dared read the gospel, because that's what the priest does. But
exactly.
That was the bread we had to share together, the bread that is every word that comes from the mouth of God. And we shared it properly, because people were doing that for themselves and each other, and they've been reading the Bible in the week, and they've been responsible for their own feeding and their own nourishing, rather than being handed things. And as a result, they were eager to engage and eager to get their teeth into it.
And wouldn't it be brilliant if we used this time of online church not to make people more dependent on their priests or vicars or whoever, but to make them less dependent, less consumers, more participative. If at the end of lockdown there were more people contributing in virtually gathered church than there were in physically gathered church before. It isn't easy, of course. And Saul Alinsky, who is the person who sort of founded community organizing, put it like this. He said, it is difficult for you to surrender that little image of God created in our own likeness, which lurks in all of us and tells us that we know what is best for people better than they do. It isn't easy for churches who sometimes think that their leaders should be acting and the congregation should just be watching like spectators or consumers. I have a friend who was reduced to tears this week by a congregation member who took it on themselves to write to them, telling them how they ought to be a church leader in these times. But the congregation member was not themselves taking a lead or doing any of the things that they were calling for. I reckon that for churches, living by the iron rule is in keeping with our earliest history. And I think that because I think Roland Allen was right. You know the story, I suspect, of Roland Allen. He wrote a book called Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours. He was a missionary to northern China in the first half of the 20th century. And at that time, the strategy of missionary agencies was to raise money to send a missionary somewhere to build a church or a hospital or a school. And at that stage, the missionary did everything, ran the budgets, preached the sermons, performed the surgery, so on. And then over time, the principle was that the missionary was supposed to train others to work with him, yes, it was him, until the local people were ready to take over. But the problem was that 60 years later, the projects begun by missionaries were still dependent on missionaries, either the original ones or their replacements. So Roland Allen says, look, you got a problem here. Your problem is a lack of trust, both in local Christians and in the Holy Spirit. And he proposed a new method, and he said, actually, this was St. Paul's method in the first place. From an early stage, look for a team of local leaders with the character sought for and give them responsibility and then leave them to it. Either move to another area or stay for a while, but as no more than a consultant, serving the local team as they wish. After all, if you think of the Bible, Titus wasn't sent to be the vicar of Crete, but to build up a local ministry team in Crete and then lead them to it. Roland Allen called it getting out of the way of the Spirit.
I second that.
Sorry?
I second that, definitely.
And so there's the iron promise. And you could say that the Chinese church, which today is at least 60 million strong, humanly speaking, owes its existence to the fact that the missionaries listened to Roland Allen with his iron promise. Here's the iron promise. God has already given to each local church all the gifts necessary to fulfill God's purpose for that church. So here's what I think. I think the time has come for that thinking to come home and allow community organizing to do to the role of vicar what Allen did to the role of missionaries in China. Ministers need to learn to believe the iron promise and apply the iron rule. Like St. Paul and his team, we need to dare to surrender control. It can transform the social action of a church, but it can also transform the life of ministers, the life of Christian leaders. They'll find themselves not sort of doing all the mission and ministry of the church and not sort of vicariously having a prayer life so that other people don't have to, or standing in for lay people who could lead worship themselves or preaching all the sermons, or you see what I mean? That we're searching in community organizing for power with, not power over. we're trying to become a ministering community rather than a community gathered around a minister. And I'm not saying coronavirus is like the Chinese People's Liberation Army, but it is revealing that the present situation with coronavirus is starting to reveal how well Christian households have been discipled. And if they've been discipled in the Roland Allen way, in the iron rule way, they can thrive with minimal input from vicars and church buildings, just like Chinese house churches thrived when the Chinese Revolution came.
I would definitely second that one. It's been really interesting, actually, because there is a contingent in churches of people who sort of come and say, will you pray for me? Or so and so is sick, will you pray for them? As though the vicar's prayers count more.
Yeah.
Or as though the sort of job of praying belongs to the vicar. You know, the kind of say one for me culture that you get. And actually, I have spent in my own parish a year and a half really unpicking that. And every time, because I felt really challenged by that really early on with the community organising principles. And so every time somebody has come to me and said, will you pray for, I've sat them down and I've said, let us pray. And I've actually got them praying with me for whatever it is. And we've done a lot of sermons on, I mean, one of the classic things that I say to my folk again and again, and they roll their eyes when I say it, because I've obviously said it quite a lot, is when you pray, say what you're thinking, because God knows anyway. And it's a bit like when you watch a movie and there are the subtitles underneath. I think God quite likes it when the subtitles match the spoken words. And actually, if they don't, God can still read the subtitles as well as listen to your spoken words, but you kind of might as well say what you're really thinking. And so that helps a little bit. So I think, and a lot of my folks are really discovering praying at home, and it is making a difference for them because they're doing it in a much more organized way. And although we have sent out some set prayers that people can pray, and there's a little order of service that they're praying from home, but they're emailing me with all the ways they've embellished it. You know, somebody emailed me with how they changed the words of a song to fit their current situation. Somebody else emailed in a link to something they found on the internet that was really inspiring, and could we send it round everybody else? And people have sent me prayers and thoughts, and this occurred to me while I was in my garden. And, you know, do you think God was in my garden with me? Yes, I think God was in your garden with you.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot of that, but it's not overnight. Which brings me to a final point for this, which is that community organising is a process. It doesn't just happen instantaneously. People don't transform instantaneously. Systems don't change instantaneously. It is a process, and in community organising terms, it's a process with 5 stages, which we're calling organising, listening, planning, taking action through public storytelling, and ensuring everyone has a place at the table. And we're going to continue to follow these stages in the coming episodes, and we'll react to your comments as we go along. And in all of this, we're going to be distinguishing the tasks of a Christian leader, which are external, building an alliance of institutions for the common good, and those which are internal, concerned with the life and growth of churches. And externally, we can change the world, and internally, we can change the church. But the we part is really important. And this change is possible because it's part of our argument that a good minister is 50-50. They spend about as much of their time working outside the bounds of their gathered congregation as within it. And that's even when there isn't a pandemic going on. So thank you for listening. And we have been Together at a Distance.
At a Distance. Rethinking Christian leadership.